New technologies have been the engine of economic growth. If you look at US economy or European economy over the last 200 years, it has had steady, sustained economic growth because technologically it's been innovative. It has reduced the cost of producing existing goods, and it has created a lot of new goods that have made consumers better off. And overall, even though people have been worried about the effects of new technologies on workers and wages throughout these 2 centuries or even longer, the technological changes that have driven these economies have also benefited workers. Wages have increased, employment has increased in all of these economies. But the idea that technology will replace workers is a very old one. It goes back to the Luddites who smashed machines because they thought the machines would take their jobs. And there's always, of course, some truth to it, is that sometimes new technologies replace machines for tasks previously performed by workers. And when that happens, some workers lose their jobs. And again, there are distributional consequences to it. But overall, the view of economists has been, and the evidence has strongly suggested, that the workers and society as a whole benefits. Nevertheless, over the last 20 years, these sort of concerns have become more pronounced. Many of the important technological changes of the last 20 years have simplified certain tasks and substituted machines for them. So we no longer need workers to do routine tasks, and machines can do them. Numerically controlled, computer-assisted machinery is all about this process. So I think technology has a more complex impact right now, and I think policymakers and citizens are afraid of what technology is doing to society. And I think this is one particular instance where companies and governments can work together, because I think it would be a big mistake to be afraid of technology. We just need to know how to harness technology, and whenever technology comes and does new tasks, it does also create new value added. And then the question is, how can we make that new value added is more broadly shared in society, so that it has the support of the society in general and it benefits society in general. What's very notable, if you look at it from a historical perspective, but sometimes overlooked, is how unusually prosperous and free we are today relative to any time in our history. If you go back 100 years, our great-grandparents were not only much poorer, but did not have many of the technologies we take for granted. Not only iPhones and computers, but indoor plumbing, roads, road network, railways, communication technologies of all sorts, shops that offer the sort of amenities that we are used to. But even if you just go back 30, 40 years, the freedoms that we enjoyed, both in our economic, political, and social lives, were much more limited. So at some level, we have totally transformed our lives in terms of what technologies we have access to, what sort of living standards we have achieved, and what rights and values we transmit to our children and we take for granted. But this has not been a steady, painless process, and it has not been a process that all countries around the world have shared. First of all, in the United States, it has had its ups and downs. In Europe, it has had its ups and downs. But more importantly, it has also not been paralleled in many different parts of the world. And one idea that goes back in social science is to think of our political institutions, our approaches to rights, and our lives, the social organization of our lives, as a mere reflection of technology, sort of technological determinism that goes back to Karl Marx's theories, but probably earlier, that sort of viewed technology and certain economic relations shaping everything else. And it's not only a Marxist view, but it's shared by many non-Marxist economists and social scientists. But when you look at history in a sort of a more open eyes, I think what you see is that technology is really an outcome of the way that we have organized our society as much as a driver of it. In other words, it's an outcome of the institutions that we have chosen. And it is those institutions that have really underpinned not only the technological progress of the world as a whole, but also the way that our economies have evolved, the way that our societies and political systems have evolved. And it has also been a major determinant of the prosperity of nations. If you look at why there are such huge differences around the world today, in fact, a very important observation is that those sorts of differences didn't really exist 200 years ago. And these differences have emerged largely as a result of the institutional divergence of nations. While some societies, including the United States and several Western European ones, have become more free and have started enforcing property rights more securely and providing a more level playing field for their citizens, the same hasn't happened in different parts of the world. And the technological changes have followed this. So the technology and economic organization of the United States and Western Europe have diverged from the rest. And as we move into the 21st century, I think the most important lesson that this sort of perspective holds for us is that neither should we take the rights and the comfort that we have for granted as an outcome of technology or as an outcome of some irreversible process of social change, nor should we ignore the possibility that those sorts of comforts and rights can be more broadly shared around the world. In fact, I think there are threats to the rights and social lives that we have developed coming from many corners, and some of them are political in nature, that the democratic rights that we have developed don't always suit everybody, and there will be movements against it. But there are also others that come from the fact that the economic relationships that we have developed, they have become more complex and they have become more difficult to manage. So it really requires some sort of vigilance on our part to make sure that the sort of revolutionary changes in our lives continue to prosper. But on the other hand, we should also be very optimistic about the fact that the same sort of changes can spread in the rest of the world. Sure, as I've noted, the institutional trajectories of different countries around the world have diverged, but at the same time, over the last 20, 30 years, we have seen many more countries trying to reform their institutions to be more democratic and to provide more rights to individuals, minorities, ethnic and religious groups. And this is, I think, part of a process that will enable these countries also to develop more modern societies that will make better use of the technologies that have been unleashed throughout the world. And as that happens, it will not only lift further and further millions of people out of poverty, but it will also create a very different world economy. We have already seen that with China. China has totally transformed its economy and in the process its society by taking huge steps away from communist centrally planned economy starting after Mao's death and Deng Xiaoping's rise to power in 1978 and thereafter. And that process has, of course, not only changed China, but it has changed the world economy. We have become a much more globalized economy because of Chinese integration into the world system. But the same can happen with many more countries in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Caribbean, in South Asia, and in many parts of Latin America. So the opportunities for technological change, for businesses, and for economic interactions are also great. And they emanate from the same source of institutional changes that will ultimately lift the rest of the world's population out of poverty.